343, my ancient enemy. This is a studio that has no genuine love from anyone. Even the most hardcore Halo fanboys have very little positive thoughts pertaining to this development team, and for good reason. Halo went from being my favorite game of all time to being one of the most disavowed games in history. Time and time again, 343 has let me and millions more down with their horrible mismanagement of the Halo franchise. As someone that cares about the story and characters present in these games and wants this series to succeed, it's hard for me to feel anything more than pure, unbridled hatred towards this team that clearly has no idea what they're doing. Even Halo Wars 2 failed to impress me, and I really don't understand the praise that game has been getting. It's by no means a bad game, but I feel very much the same way about Halo Wars 2 as I do about every modern Marvel movie. It's inoffensively passable, does nothing to raise the bar, and is very little in the way of interesting characters, dialogue, or plot points that can immerse me into this world. In other words, it's basically like the Thor movies. Why do people like them?
The world may never know.
From a gameplay perspective, it's fine, even though the PC controls could have, and honestly should have, been better. The graphics look nice, the music is alright, and the voice acting is good. But beyond that, people are treating this like it's the game that saved Halo. The story was half-baked and underdeveloped. People are treating this faceless Spartan like he's the successor to Master Chief, despite the only noteworthy thing he did was jump out of a ship that he didn't even blow up. And people are jerking off over the return of the original art style as though that's the big defining factor of whether or not these are good games or not. I mean, sure, at least there weren't any armor pieces that looked like blue waffles, but that really isn't saying much. I know it may seem a bit pretentious and arrogant to say so at face value, but bear with me here. A lot of big Halo YouTubers have a serious issue with conveying their ideas in a meaningful way. Not that I think 343 is particularly good at listening to fan feedback in the first place, since they can't do one good thing without fucking up 80 other things, but I imagine it's pretty difficult to listen to fan feedback if most of it comes down to, I want Halo Reach 2 even if it doesn't make any fucking sense for it to resist. Or, I want iconic Halo back.
But the iconicness of Halo's art style does not stop there, and because of how untypical it was, and how much it worked, it was iconic. Now, this level of iconic applied to a majority of other assets too. The elites were so typically elite, and just overall made them look so elite, and more so, iconic, are the absolute epitome of iconicness when it comes to the elite design. Halo created so many iconic designs, and that did nothing but reinstate how iconic the designs were, and that's why the Halo art style became so iconic, is still so iconic to this day. Now, you might say that it's only iconic. The issue is, Halo's art style was so iconic. I'd say that Halo and Star Wars' art styles were as iconic. The iconic shotgun sound, the iconicness, with things like the iconic Scorpion, iconic Wraith, and iconic Ghost designs. Iconic. Halo's true iconic. We're rejecting a truly iconic art style. Iconic that looked, behaved, and sounded elegant, silent, and deadly, and perfectly elite. Iconic, and iconic.
Seriously, dude, just use a fucking different word for once. I watched one of your videos while I was stoned and still managed to pick out the word iconic like 30 times. Granted, no one is as bad at conveying ideas as Halo follower, who will find a green stick figure in the bowels of DeviantArt and claim it's leaked footage of Halo Wars 2 while stealing money from other people. But I will now attempt to explain every single individual reason why 343's Halo games are objectively inferior to the quality of the Bungie games. And before you comment, let me throw out this disclaimer. It's totally fucking useless to speculate which developer would do a better job at making Halo games, just like it's a fucking useless idea to beg Microsoft to bring Bungie back, because neither of those outcomes will ever happen. I think it's fucking stupid to ask, would Respawn Entertainment do a better job at making Halo 6, when anyone with any level of cognitive thought knows that's not gonna happen anyway. For better or worse, we're stuck with 343, so let's focus on the faults of this company rather than speculate about how good another developer would do if this was some alternate timeline where someone else was making Halo games instead. Ultimately, this is meant to address the issues of 343 Industries and to hopefully spark the discussion necessary to making Halo 6 a good game. Also, there will be a lot of dick jokes. The success of Halo 6 is going to be the deciding factor as to whether or not I even stick with this franchise. If Halo 6 isn't good, then I'm abandoning Halo altogether. So let's have a discussion, talk about the issues, and get it through to 343 that there's a reason why people don't like their games. Halo has always had a very Doom and Quake-esque style of gameplay, which is honestly the reason why I fell in love with the game in the first place. Everything came down to gun, melee, and grenade, and sometimes maps would throw in a fourth element in the form of vehicles. Everyone started off with the same weapons, and littered across the map were power weapons that drastically change your position of power on the battlefield. While the power weapons and vehicles still remain intact, the style of gameplay has not. Rather than being a walking tank that runs around the battlefield shooting and punching dudes in the face, you're now a ragdoll Power Ranger that dashes, sprints, hovers, ground pound, slides, and thrusts around the battlefield in such a way that fundamentally destroys the classic Halo formula. No matter what 343 tries to do, sprint simply does not belong in Halo. All of these movement abilities fundamentally change the gameplay to feel more like some sick bastardization of Crysis. If I wanted to play Crysis, then I'd just go play that instead. People play Halo because of its arcade-like simplicity, but if you can dash out of the way of bullets or grenades or vehicles, slide underneath projectiles, thrust out of the way of a melee, or sprint away from a gunfight, then you are fundamentally breaking the flow of the game. I can at least give 343 props for trying to remedy the sprint issue by making your shield stay down until you stop sprinting, but again, you have unlimited sprint and can easily get away from a gunfight, hunker down, and wait like 3 seconds for the shields to pop back up. While maybe not as blatantly annoying as armor lock, which just stops the game entirely, all of these movement abilities take away from the fair gunfights that Halo used to have. Though arcade-like in nature, Halo was a very tactical game. You had to choose every encounter wisely, use your radar to detect enemy movement, crouch to get around stealthily, and use teamwork to accomplish difficult feats. Now the radar is effectively useless due to its pitiful range and the fact that everyone moves too fast across maps that are too small in order for it to be used effectively. Nowadays, Halo's been reduced to a bunch of brainless mice running around a maze completely at random without any semblance of teamwork involved. And the ADS, and yes, it is ADS because it makes you more accurate at longer ranges, even with assault rifles that have always been meant specifically for close-range encounters, have turned the game into a generic FPS without any real sense of identity. I'm not saying it's a COD clone because I view that as invalid criticism. The games are still very fundamentally different and have practically no similarities aside from just being very fast FPS games. COD didn't create sprinting, ground pounding, or ADS. However, Halo is undoubtedly a lesser game for having all of these functions. The reason being that they take away from the classic elements that made the game so much fun to begin with. Everything felt fair and balanced due to you having the same weapons and abilities, the same chance to get every weapon or vehicle in the map as anyone else, and you didn't have this ability to pussy out of a gunfight. At best, if you happened to be close to a piece of cover, you could momentarily hide behind it, but even then, your enemy could use a grenade to flush you out of that cover. Now, grenades have practically no use aside from moving the gunfight to a slightly different location or deterring an enemy from going into another room. And the movement abilities prevent you from keeping the accuracy required to make the shots on an enemy. Halo has always been a game about accuracy, which always kind of confused me since it's only on Xbox. Hey guys, can we get Halo completely on PC now? Has anyone at Microsoft come to the realization that the Xbox One sucks? 4 shots from a BR to the head kills an enemy. Now you can bullshit your way to the side, slide underneath shots, slide and jump thrust, and totally rip someone's aim away from you. On one hand, it's great for the guy that has the shotgun so he can do that and getting close to you, but it sucks for you because even if you're great at the game, someone can bullshit their way into shotgunning you in the face. It takes away from the tactical gameplay of the original Halos and gives you a get-out-of-jail-free card. And the ability to use ADS on every weapon takes away from the usefulness of others. Getting the DMR or sniper rifle used to be a game changer. You got to hang back and pick enemies off from a distance. Now you can shoot an enemy from halfway across the map with an assault rifle. It would be okay if this worked like the Doom 3 zoom function, which did just that. It zoomed in. But Halo 5 has made you more accurate with your shots despite 343's insistence that it doesn't work like that. You do realize we can go into Forge and prove you wrong, right? Why the fuck are you lying to us, you smug, cocksucking faggot? What used to be a very personal style of gameplay where the player had to take risks and choose every encounter with cunning and a plan has turned into chickens with their heads cut off, wildly flailing around the map like some fucked up monstrosity made in Gmod. It sucks because Halo 5 had good gameplay on its own, I like it, but again, it doesn't feel anything like a Halo game. You can't play Halo 5 like you played Halo 1, 2, 3, or even 4. If I didn't want to play Halo, then I'd just go play a different game. This also carries over to the single-player PvE. These abilities take a lot of challenge away. Halo 5 was undoubtedly one of the easiest games I've ever played, and definitely the easiest in the Halo franchise. Completing the game on Legendary took me like 1 hour longer than it took to play it on Easy. 343 needs to rely on enemies that sporadically teleport around the map in order to come up with something that even feels like a challenge. But as Destiny taught us, making your enemies teleport at random to bullshit their way out of a fair fight tends to piss people off. Even their attempt at making the hunters into more vicious mini-bosses, a change that I actually liked, by the way, was nullified by the fact that you could thrust around their attacks with ease. In general, none of the enemies in the recent Halo games games have been truly challenging. The only real difficult part was fighting the Warden, and that was because the final boss fight in Halo 5 was an unbalanced clusterfuck with one of the worst checkpoint systems I have ever seen. If you need to rely on 3 of the same boss accompanied by several insta-kill turrets conveniently placed in front of the crates that have the rockets required to kill the bosses, then your boss fight is fucked. The only thing 343 has done to the enemies in Halo 5 is give them damage modifiers depending on their difficulty. Forget Halo Reach, where one of the only good things I liked about that game was the fact that the AI was actually smarter on Legendary. No, let's give you less health and call it good. It's just lazy. One of the things that makes games like Combat Evolved so much fun to play, even despite the repetitive level design, is that the enemies are hard to fight. You may be a walking tank, but even a walking tank can blow up from time to time. It's up to you to make sure that doesn't happen. When you can literally run circles around every enemy in the game, it's difficult to find the challenge the game is meant to present. But possibly one of the biggest issues with the recent Halo games is 343's willingness to shoehorn in gimmicks that, rather than adding to the overall experience, actually make it a lesser game. Halo 5's co-op did absolutely nothing to aid in the game. Dead Space 3's co-op at least made the experience more diverse and added meaningful story details. You could tell the game was built in mind for both single player and co-op. Halo 5 does the exact opposite and only wants you to play co-op, which means that the game relies almost exclusively on in-game dialogue to constitute its character development, and once again detracts from the challenge in the game. The biggest issue with 343 is that they add all of this shit to the game, but don't build the game around those functions. Call of Duty did much the same thing. Titanfall was super successful, so of course they had to rip off a far superior game since they're falling into irrelevancy. Unfortunately, the dev teams decided to make a normal COD game and just slapped wall running in it with a couple surfaces where you could use that function. 343 wants to add in all of this shit that sounds great on paper, but they try to keep the same level design in order to remind people they're still playing a Halo game. The reason why Titanfall and Crisis work so well is because the whole game is molded around your character and those abilities. Your character is just as much of a weapon as your guns are. The problem with Call of Duty and Halo is they want to mold the character around the game without realizing that you can't just add in all of these new abilities without fundamentally changing the entire experience in order for it to work. But if you want to change the whole experience, then why are you even making a Halo game? These abilities have absolutely obliterated vehicular gameplay. Ghosts, warthogs, tanks, banshees, all of them can now be easily avoided, hijacked, or blown up. As if to add insult to injury, many of the weapons are so overpowered at this point that you can fly halfway across the damn map and still get killed by someone using a regular ass BR. Remember in classic Halo where you needed a rocket or sheer fucking luck to blow these guys up? Well, fuck that. We want you to be able to stand your ground with a magnum. But what's truly insulting here is the fact that 343 boasts about these new abilities like they're at the top of the world. The player base sees sprint in Halo 4 and we say we don't want that, so they go the extra mile of giving us unlimited sprint, thrusting, hovering, sliding, ground pounding, and bashing. It's like they're directly telling us to go fuck ourselves. But if we go back to multiplayer, we really need to talk about some of the incredibly egregious differences that destroy the gameplay. Bullet magnetism and increased friction and aim assist rip control from your hands. How did we go from a game where you have to lead your shots that were affected by a moderately realistic physics engine to a game where you can literally shoot the air next to a character and the bullet will magically curve its way into the enemy's face? Bullet magnetism has absolutely no benefit aside from making the game more casual. Halo players don't want a casual game. We want it to be challenging. We like the difficulty curve. One of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had in any game was when I finally started doing good in a match of Halo 3, which is the best Halo game, by the way. Now it's difficult not to do good in Halo 5. If I can pick up the game and immediately start doing great, then that's a bad sign. The only other game where that happens is Call of Duty, where I can jump into a match even after abandoning it for months and still do the best on my team. Everything from the faster paced gameplay, the overpowered weaponry, the faster shots per second that leads to an ultimately faster TTK, to just immediately giving players weapons that they can use to shoot at extremely long distances, leads to the ultimate breaking down of what Halo is supposed to be. The personality is gone and replaced with hollow, emotionless shooting galleries. This has been something about 343 that I really just don't get. Is there even a single element of the game that hasn't been changed? Ships, vehicles, weapons, armor, everything looks totally different. I can understand a few minor updates. I can understand making things look more detailed and realistic as graphical fidelity naturally increases. But I mean that things look so different that it barely even resembles the same thing anymore. You can tell what it's meant to be, but it's so radically different that if you saw it in a different game, you wouldn't think twice about it. While there are some design choices I liked, like Master Chief's new armor or the beefier look of the assault rifle, things like Covenant soldiers, half of the game's arsenal, and almost every vehicle in the game just looks wrong. One of the attractive things about Halo is its blend of over-the-top, almost ridiculous-looking armor pieces and ships that straight up look like giant flying guns, to the almost fantasy-like weapons and armor sets of the Covenant. Now, the elites look like their faces have been smashed in with a sledgehammer, their armor is as impractical as it is ugly, their ships look like amorphous blobs of something, and their weapons are so far gone from their original design that it's getting genuinely difficult to tell what they're even supposed to be anymore. Even the Forerunner technology is just a visual overload. Don't get me wrong, I actually kind of like the new designs, but there's pieces that just don't even make sense, seem totally unnecessary, and there's way too much obnoxious lights over everything. It's gotten to the point where there's just too much to take in. Sure, the Knight's little T-Rex arms look really cool up close, but when you're shooting at them, you don't really tend to see them, do you? Especially not when they just dissolve anyway. I wouldn't have even known they had those little arms if there wasn't a close-up shot of one of them in one of the Halo 4 trailers. But perhaps the most egregious insult to Halo is the armor design of the Spartans. Now, I smoke a lot of weed, and I've dropped acid a couple times, but maybe we're discussing a drug that I haven't done yet, but what the fuck are these people smoking? What is this even supposed to be? Not only is this the gayest thing I've seen outside of Jay Naylor's DeviantArt page, but it makes no fucking sense. Why are like half of these armor and helmet pieces just reskins of the same fugly armor and helmet pieces? This one literally has a target on it that screams, "Hey you! Fuck me!" Totally setting aside the fact that there's practically no more options for genuine customization anymore, the options we do get are fucking horrifying. Although I don't think Halo Wars 2 is a particularly good game, I do have to agree that the art design was eons better than this unmitigated dog shit. This is the most visually unappealing customization I have ever seen, and I have played Call of Duty Ghosts. You don't go there, 343. Stop it. I don't have a lot of good to say about Halo Reach, but the one thing I distinctly remember is how cool everyone's armor looked. You got to see everyone in the lobby, and when you were in game, you could kill someone or get killed by someone and say, huh, he had some pretty fucking cool armor. Sure, some of the pieces looked weird and didn't seem to fit at all, but it was cool looking. Now you have helmets, visors, and full body sets. Gone are the days of changing your knees, forelegs, shoulders, chest, sideways fanny pack, and helmet attachments. Now you get to choose between like 5 good helmets and 5 good armor sets, almost all of which look totally identical. And almost none of these look practical on any level. At least in previous Halo games, you could tell what everything was meant to be. This guy has a ton of equipment to carry, this guy has extra bullets for his sniper rifle and camouflaged armor to stay hidden. Why is this guy a fucking unicorn? And none of this is assisted by the fact that Halo 5 in particular is just a horribly ugly game. Rather than making some attempt at using technical tricks used in previous Halo games, 343 said fuck features like dynamic shading and anti-aliasing, and went ahead and tried to get as much detail in these super fancy metal ramps as they could. Everything in Halo 5 just looks disgusting, which is weird because even though I hated the changes to the armor and enemies in Halo 4, that game looked pretty fucking beautiful. The only problem is that if the rest of your game was ass ugly, people aren't gonna give a shit about those graphics. Recent Halo games have felt increasingly detached. What I mean is that it doesn't feel like an actual community anymore. Remember when you could view all the players in the lobby whenever you wanted? Shoot them a message, mute them if necessary, check out their armor and achievements? Well, now it's just a bunch of hollow boxes. Apparently this was just because 343 didn't want people to look at a higher rank of someone else and quit because of it. I can't even begin to express how mind-numbingly stupid that sounds. And for context, they said this long before they even ended up putting ranked matches in the game in the first place. So you're telling me that people would quit the game just because someone on the opposite team plays the game more and therefore got a higher rank? I barely play Halo 5 and I'd say I'm fairly proficient at it. I'm not the best guy on the field, but you want me on your team if you know what I'm saying. I'm only like a rank 60 or something and I've owned the game since it came out. I just don't really play it often. Are people going to discredit me just because I'm a low rank? Not that the competitive ranking system is any better better considering it's based off of team wins, so basically if your whole team sucks or they all quit, then you get fucked for it. What a wonderful fucking idea, 343. Fuck the individual and punish everybody. Great logic. So rather than just hiding the rank, they decide to hide literally everything from view. No armor, no achievements, no unlocks, nothing, because at no point did any of them think to just disable the actual rank from appearing. So wait, you can keep people from viewing everything, but you can't make one simple thing invisible instead? It's really weird because you have this fucking clan thing on Waypoint, but yet you obscure everything else from view. You have to do what Destiny did and completely remove any and all sense of in-game player interaction and put it all on an external website. We went from a ton of people talking in the lobbies and trying to communicate with one another to either completely silent lobbies or just one or two people playing music through their mics. They tried to incentivize people to join a clan in order to get these super cool helmets and armor pieces, but there's only one and it doesn't look all that great to begin with, so what's the point? But what's truly sad is how 343 has completely and utterly destroyed the entire Halo community. The only old Halo YouTuber I can think of that's still around is Halo Follower, and well, needless to say, he's not a very good example of the kind of people we want to be associated with. All the big guys are gone now, completely pushed away from the game everyone once knew and loved. 343 has made it abundantly clear that they don't care about the people that have been playing this game for years. I've played it since 2002, I was like 5 or 6 at that point. Now, 15 years later, the game me and many other people grew up with has turned into something totally different. It barely even resembles the old Halo that we knew and loved, and 343's continued attempts to change the game to fit their vision has hurt the game and its player base drastically. Halo 5 had some of the worst sales figures in the franchise history. Granted, I'm sure that was partially due to the Xbox One's terrible introduction, but Halo used to be a console seller. I bought an Xbox One pretty much just for Halo. If I had known that Halo 5 would have such an abominable story, I'm not so sure I would have wasted my money. Halo feels like a shell, and the lifeblood of the series, its community that created interesting and awesome machinimas, started groups to talk about the story, made awesome forge maps and game modes, and got together to play games all the time, is practically non-existent. 343 has effectively de-incentivized all community features. The UI is designed to show as little of the people you're playing with as possible. Customization options have been limited to the point where you may as well not even have it anymore. Machinima makers have been fucked to the point where it's not even fun to make them, and the community has been so drastically cut down that the community forge maps aren't even worth having in the game at this point. It's no secret that 343 isn't great at telling stories. While I generally liked Halo 4, they're currently going one good story out of 5, technically 7 if you count the comics. Granted, Halo 5 and the comics were written by someone ailed by autism, but they still don't have many good ideas, and isn't assisted by their total ineptitude on the subject. They seem to think that Halo players want simpler stories when really that isn't the problem. There's a difference between a complicated story and a bad one, and Halo 5 was simply bad. Halo 4 even had some dumb moments too. The librarian scene could be taken out of the game entirely and it really wouldn't have changed much. If anything, it makes a plot hole because everyone on Ivanov's station was disintegrated, clothes and all, but Master Chief's armor was still intact. To my understanding, she only changed his genes, not how his armor works. If they just pass it off as his armor being the thing that protected him, I would have accepted that as a totally reasonable explanation. Otherwise, the librarian scene played no real role in Halo 4, and there honestly could have been a much more creative way to tell the Didact story than magic ghost lady telling you in a vision where she gives you superpowers. And then of course the whole Cortana turning into 50 little Cortanas that turn into a bridge that trap the Didact just makes no fucking sense. Here's the weird thing about 343 stories. They want to make a fantasy more than they want to make a science fiction space opera. One of the reasons why I love Halo is because it has the depth and expansive lore of the Lord of the Rings, but the action movie epicness of Star Wars. 343 doesn't seem to understand this. They think that they need to make their lore so convoluted that it blatantly contradicts itself. We went from humans being descendants of the Forerunners to humans having been super advanced at one point and then being blasted back to the Stone Age and nobody remembering anything or keeping records of any kind. I'm okay with the idea of the librarian keeping everyone on the Ark when the Halo's fired and then putting them back on their respective planets later, but this ancient human lore is so fundamentally fucked that you'd think that every employee at 343 just ran a train on the original trilogy's asshole. And now the AIs are the reclaimers. Even Halo 4 didn't fuck shit up that bad. 343 seems to think that their stories are super deep and that their lore is Tolkien levels of amazing, but don't seem to have an understanding of consistency in their own plot lines. But the worst part of the new Halo games is the fact that you're required to read the books in order to understand what's going on. Sure, the main plot is easy enough to understand, but I had no idea what the fuck was even happening in Halo 5 because I hadn't read all the books yet. I didn't know what the domain was, what the Warden was supposed to be, how Cortana bullshit her way into coming back to life, why Buck was a Spartan, how June bullshit his way back into the narrative, and I sure as fuck didn't know that the Didact didn't die and managed to bullshit his way back to life, only for Master Chief to kill him again, but in a comic. All of the little things that add up to so much just never made any damn sense. Now, I love to read, but reading a book takes a while. I can finish a game faster than I can read any given book. Currently, there are 11 novels and several comics that have important plot details that the games just don't even bother to explain. Naturally, when anyone with common sense calls this out as being a bad thing, the developer would naturally go to a great lengths to fix the problem, right? Wrong. Not 343. That would entail that they would have to make a good business decision. No, when people say they don't want to be required to read external source material to understand the story of the games, 343 takes that as, our stories are just too deep for you plebs. Let's make it all easier. Oh, I'm gonna jerk off to my own ego. My cum tastes like cinnamon. And what do you know? Halo Wars 2 had a disturbingly simple story that can be summarized as, the Spirit of Fire finds the Ark, they kill brutes, and that's the whole game. There's zero depth, all of the character development comes from the first Halo Wars game, and nothing gets accomplished by the end. There is zero resolution for anything whatsoever. The villain has more screen time in the commercials than he did in the actual game. One of the characters gets stuck on a Halo and sees a Guardian because people cared so much about them, and then the Spirit of Fire is stuck on the Ark fighting brutes. If this shit is representative of how the future Halo games are gonna be, then I may as well just drop out now. Halo 1, 2, and 3 all had moderately easy to understand stories, but there was still a lot of depth to them. There was mystery and intrigue with the Forerunners and the Flood. There were character arcs and resolutions to storylines. Making a story simplistic to the point where it's barely even a plot in the first place isn't the right way to go about this. And I guess that takes me into the next part of the video. 343's overinflated ego. Okay, I'm just gonna come out and say it. 343 has the most overinflated ego of any developer in history. They think that just because they're making Halo games, that they're hot shit and deserving of praise that they never fucking earned. Because apparently having almost your entire fanbase hate you was something worth bragging about. When Halo 5 was announced, they kept coming their pants over the fact that they took out custom classes, a thing that they did and we told them that we didn't want, and put in same starts, which was Bungie's idea that we wanted back, and they fawned over it as though they were the ones that came up with the concept of fair starts in the first place. They did the same thing with the return of arena-style gameplay, the return of more classic-sounding music, better weapon balance, and trying to do what Halo 2 did by making a huge marketing campaign for their game. None of these things are original ideas that 343 came up with. All of them were things that we had either asked for or Bungie put in themselves. What baffles the fucking shit out of me is the fact that they genuinely believe that there's some kind of respectable gaming giant when every single game they've released has been universally despised. I can't think of a single 343 game that wasn't dog shit in some way. Halo 4 had a mostly good story, but everything else about it sucked. Halo 5 had good multiplayer and Forge, but it didn't feel like Halo and totally and irreparably fucked the storyline. Halo Wars 2 wasn't necessarily bad, but it was so pointless and dull that if it didn't exist, it wouldn't change anything. The Master Chief Collection still, to this day, is a broken, buggy mess. Their two mobile games have no right or reason to exist, and with the backwards compatibility on all of the MCC games, it's just proof that they don't give a shit about their own product. There aren't any 343 fans, yet they act as though they're the second coming of CD Projekt Red. You made a game where a character became a fucking bridge. You don't get to act like you're cool. 343 is a development team that's full of themselves. They have this fucked up idea that they're totally infallible and incapable of doing any wrong. When people said that Halo 5 story sucked and that we don't want to read 15 books and comics in in order to understand the games, they treat us like we're children and say they'll make their games stupider for us. Halo gamers that like and care about the story don't give a shit if you incorporate stuff from the books. We want that, we just don't want to rely on reading them in order to understand everything. A good writer can incorporate those elements without forcing the gamer to read the books in order to understand. I don't take issue with this when it comes to Metro or The Witcher because those books were written a long time before the games were ever made, and in the case of The Witcher, all of those games are sequels to the books. Sure, there were a few books written back in the original Halo days, but they complemented the games. They added more layers of depth, they didn't take away from it. You could still play Halo 1 to 3 and not read the books, but if you did read them, then you got a more enriching narrative out of it. 343 seems to think that you can only tell a good story if there's books to go along with it. Otherwise, they don't even bother trying. They keep making excuses for why they can't do something or why they won't do something, and it usually comes down to we don't have the time or it's too hard. The reason behind the split screen issue in Halo 5 was bullshit. They couldn't make it work with Halo 5 because of the 60 FPS, yet they could in the Master Chief Collection? Do they think we're all retarded? I guess so, since they seem to believe that their attempt at making Halo go back to its roots was their idea the whole time. But the most harmful part of it all is the fact that they don't think they can do anything wrong. They keep going in with these grandiose ideas that I'm sure sound great on paper, but they think to themselves that it'll be awesome without taking the time to sit down and think about whether or not it'll actually work. Giant robot space owls sounds like a really cool idea until you realize that they literally never do anything in the entire game except hover there. Yeah, having a character hunt Chief down as a traitor sounds cool until you realize that it was so poorly written that if they just took 30 seconds to talk it out, they would have realized they were both on the same side this whole time. Nope, let's have a sumo wrestler cutscene fight where they both stumble around like fat tubs of shit that got winded after climbing the stairs. That sounds fucking great. When you're making a product that you want to sell to people, you presumably want it to be as good as you can possibly make it. You supposedly care about it and want people to like it, so you put all of your time and effort into it in order to create the best product possible. Sometimes it will be good, sometimes it'll be bad, but you have to go into it with a certain level of humility because if you start trying to write a book, design a game, film a movie, or draw a comic and you immediately think that all of your ideas are good without putting considerable time and effort into thinking it all out, then you just end up making an ass out of yourself. But what's truly telling is this interview with Frank O'Connor where he literally says they hired people that hated Halo. He tries to put a nice spin on it where he says that they're just saying that it was meant to be, I think Halo would be better if it did this. Here's the problem. Hiring people that openly dislike the game based on the things that make it fun and unique isn't a good idea. The fact that this colossal retard actually, unironically said that without the immediate thought of, wow, I'm a fucking dolt, just goes to show how inflated their ego is. They literally think that this is a good thing. If you're gonna hire people to make a Halo game, you should get people who are either totally unbiased about what kind of game it is or already like Halo. Hiring people that want to make it Call of Duty because they already don't like Halo is the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard. 343, look at your multiplayer numbers. It's a fucking joke. No other Halo game has had its population drop off nearly as fast as 4 and 5 did. Now you don't even bother to put the numbers in the game at all in order to hide how piss poor your games are performing. At what point do you admit to yourselves that all you're doing is fucking up the whole franchise? This isn't just some sense of a customer not wanting anything to change. I welcomed a change of pace to freshen up the series. I wanted to see what 343 was going to do with Halo 4 and was genuinely excited about it. But when I saw the Halo 5 E3 footage, I was bored out of my mind. I was so disinterested in Halo Wars 2 that I stopped playing it after the first week. The mobile games weren't bad, but they were just shitty little mobile games. They're really only there if you're too bored to play anything else. The Master Chief Collection is a broken mess. Halo 4's plot might be good for the most part, but every other aspect of the game is shit. 343 very well may be one of, if not the most, hated developers in gaming right now. I can think of 50 games I'd rather play than Halo, and that's a damn shame. I went from playing Halo every single day to going months without even glancing at my Xbox. Now I have The Witcher 3, Doom, Metro, Far Cry, The Elder Scrolls, Dark Souls, Overwatch, Titanfall 2, Ori and the Blind Forest, Night in the Woods, Alan Wake, Battlefield, Tomb Raider, all of which are better games than Halo. The game no longer feels like a Halo title. It doesn't even look like one. 343 tries to say they love and care about this series, but how can you when you hire people that hate it? How can you try and tell us that this is a game worth our time and money if you're going to make it into something that it's not? What's the point of making a Halo game if you're going to make it so detached from everything that made it a great game in the first place that it may as well not even be called Halo anymore? anymore. This is the weird thing about 343. They hire old school Halo players like Bravo to fix their shit on multiplayer, and yet they make it even less like Halo than Halo 4 was. They try to appeal to the community, yet completely ignore them at the same time. They've been known to delete critical posts on Waypoint. They even dared to say, "What are you doing to Halo?" as a joke, when we've literally been saying exactly that since they started fucking with the series. I know that people have tried to defend 343 by saying that they love Halo, but they just make mistakes, but honestly, I'm sick of trying to think up of ways to give 343 the benefit of the doubt. I'm sick of trying to constantly make up excuses for them, and believe me, I've thought of a lot of different ways to try and defend them in the past. But at some point, I have to be intellectually honest with myself and look objectively at what 343 is doing. Time and time again, we tell them what we do and do not want, and they tell us to fuck ourselves and go even further in the wrong direction. They pretend like they're taking Halo back to its roots by making fair starts, but the whole game feels completely different. So we're forced into figuring out which camp 343 falls into. Do they hate Halo and want it to be something totally different, or are they completely and utterly incompetent and have no idea what they're doing? While it's impossible to know for sure unless they tell us themselves outright, which of course will never happen, it's not really unreasonable to ask the all too legitimate question of, does 343 hate Halo, or are they just a shit development team? I'd love to believe that 343 has only the best intentions in mind, but when they literally say that they hire people that hate Halo, it's kind of difficult to defend them. But even if this is false, even if this is just a hit piece, even if none of this is even remotely true, we're left with the unnerving truth that 343 is simply bad at making Halo games. While none of the games on their own are outright badly made, they're so far from resembling Halo that if you slapped another name on the box, no one would think anything of it. 343 has already made it clear that they intend on staying around for a long time, and Microsoft has supported their claim that Halo will be around until the year 2030. So in other words, 343 is going to be making Halo games for the next 13 years at least, endlessly dragging out this mess of a plot that contradicts itself in 100 different areas, and changing the game to the point where you may as well just accept that it isn't even Halo anymore. Well, now that I spent this entire video shitting all over 343, let's address the wealth of people that'll surely comment something along the lines of, "Well, you just don't like change, so suck it, Halo 3 faggot." In actuality, that's a gross misrepresentation of my actual position. I desire change. I stopped playing Call of Duty because it refused to change, and the only time it did anything different, it just ripped off mechanics from superior games and didn't bother to mold the game around it. Much the same thing is happening with Halo. 343 puts in all these new abilities but doesn't bother to try and make them fit with the rest of the game. But the fundamental problem is that traditional Halo doesn't mesh well with the quasi-crisis game they're trying to make. So naturally, the question boils down to this: how do we keep Halo fresh without totally fucking the gameplay up the ass? Well, sit down, bitch, because I'm gonna tell you. Now, let me be clear before I start this one off. I am aware that the common argument against everything I'm about to say is, it's too late to change it, or 343 won't take these things out. But here's my rebuttal. I don't think that's necessarily true. 343 has already shown that they can take these abilities out at a whim. Just look at fucking custom games. And if the overwhelming success of the recent Doom game proves anything, it's that people can still have fun without these obnoxious abilities. But despite that, even if 343 does decide to keep all of this nonsense shit in, they need, and I mean need, as in this is a requirement, to put in classic modes at launch. The game can no longer afford to just tell its longtime fans to fuck off for months on end. Custom games without the abilities on makes Halo 5 infinitely more fun. So at the very least, if you're going to stay hellbent on keeping these abilities in the game, you need to make sure, damn sure, that there's a dedicated classic playlist the instant the game comes out. This is non-negotiable. It's not fucking difficult. If you can allow your players to make it in custom games, then you can make a server for it. Hell, if you can allow us to jump into another player's custom game in a dedicated search browser, there is absolutely no excuse not to have it. There, now that we got that shit out of the way, let's get to it. So let's break this down. There's a reason why people keep asking for classic playlists. There's a reason why all these fan-made Halo games are going back to the classic gameplay we all know and love. It's not just some small fraction of the community like 343 would have you believe. They said they ran a poll about how many people wanted Sprint in the game, and apparently only like 11% said they wanted it gone. Well, I don't remember when the fuck that poll happened because I sure as shit never got to vote on it. Am I expected to check their shitty waypoint site all the time and hope I stumble upon that poll? Here's the thing that 343 needs to understand. We want innovation, but we don't want it to change so much that it's not even the same thing anymore. So let's get some objective truths out of the way. 1. The movement abilities are incompatible with Halo's formula. 2. The art design is incompatible with the Halo franchise. 3. The quality of the story and writing has plummeted. Now, how do we fix these 3 things and push Halo forward in a way that would make both classic players happy and still not feel like a huge downgrade for new players? First off, get rid of sprint, thrust, hover, slide, ground pound, charge, and clamber because they simply do not work in the context of Halo. The reason they don't work is due in large part because of the shield system. You know the drill: 4 shots from a BR kills you, 5 shots from a DMR kills you, 6 shots from a pistol, 1 shot from a sniper, 20-ish depending on what area of the body they hit you with an assault rifle, and so on. The shield system is a fixed element kept intact throughout all of the Halo games with the exception of ODST since you don't play as a Spartan, and Wars since it's an RTS. The reason why these abilities have not and simply cannot work with the shield system is because the TTK is naturally slower in Halo than it is in any other game. 343 has tried to combat this element of Halo by quickening the TTK. While it's still 4 BR shots to the head to get the kill, the rate of fire has been drastically increased. There's a reason you die so much faster in Halo 5 than you do in Halo 3. If the TTKs were the same as they were in the classic games, then you'd get maybe a couple kills per match since people can at any time sprint and thrust away from any encounter. To combat this, 343 has done 3 things. Lower the TTK as much as possible, increase bullet magnetism, and make the maps far more open than they ever have been. Have you ever noticed that in 343's games you seem to get shot from impossible angles? Or how about when you're flying and your ship gets blasted into oblivion by BRs from the opposite side of the map? That's because while 343 has tried to make arena-style maps, they've left as many open spaces as possible. Rather than give the player more ample cover, they've decided that your movement abilities should be good enough as a replacement, but because they can't have all of these movement abilities to balance out the gameplay, they need to make the maps have as many sightlines as possible. Let's look at the map Plaza, otherwise known as the worst Halo map ever made. What makes this map so bad? Well, it tries to go back from the arena style that most of the Halo 5 maps have implemented, which is to say it's pretty much just a big circle with a line in the middle of it. What breaks it in so many other maps is the ludicrous amount of unnecessary shit everywhere. You have all these random bridges and alcoves, a million different places to clamber on. This fucking spot. And no matter where you are, there is not one single solitary location where you can't be shot at from 3 or more angles. Most of my deaths in Halo 5 come down to people shooting me from angles I wasn't looking at. Sure, that's not unheard of in a Halo game, but I find that most of my deaths aren't by people in front of me, but people that just stumble onto me from the sides or the back. This is because there's so many different sightlines intended so people can't bitch their way out of a gunfight that it's borderline impossible to have a fair fight at all. Even remastered maps have way larger openings than their predecessors so that you can always pop a shot off at a guy. Not only has every map been unnaturally elongated in order to accommodate for 5 entirely new movement abilities, but they're given parts and pieces that don't even make sense or are so open that you may as well paint a giant red target on your asshole, walk bare ass into a gay bar and scream, "Hey, fuck me!" Let's analyze a new game that came out, Doom. While the gameplay is drastically different from the original 90s masterpiece, Doom 2016 still gets the core elements right without breaking the gameplay, and since I loved Halo for many of the same reasons that I loved Doom, let me break this down for you. Doom comes down to 3 core elements: picking up weapons, shooting enemies with the correct weapon in the correct situation, and map control. Similarly, Halo comes down to gun, melee, grenade, picking up weapons, shooting enemies with the correct weapon in the correct situation, and map control. While Halo 5 still has most of these elements, the randomness of the map design, the faster TTK, and the implementation of various movement abilities makes map control impossible, grenades practically useless, melee practically useless, and power weapons are far more difficult to wield. How am I supposed to effectively snipe a dude in the face if he can at any time slide, thrust, or sprint out of my crosshairs? So why does Doom, a game that has a jetpack double jump, not share the same issue? Because Doom's gameplay is focused around the elements on the map. You need to keep an eye on your health and armor, pick up weapons and power-ups, and pay attention to your map and surroundings in order to effectively beat the enemy team. Doom has many areas where, if held, can give a team a drastic advantage. In Halo 3, if you are on the rafters in Epitaph, the high-rises and bridges in Last Resort, the towers or open rooms in Guardian, or the sniper towers in the Pit, then you could lock down the enemy team and ensure victory. You just had to keep an eye on your motion tracker so no one snuck up on you. If you were at these positions and had effective power weapons, then you could tear the entire enemy team apart. Halo 5, on the other hand, has nothing like this. There's no area that gives you an advantage because there's too many ways to get shot from across the map. Everyone's running around like chickens with their heads cut off without any semblance of strategy because there's no control. Your radar is borderline useless. Map callouts may as well not even be in the game in the first place. And the power weapons change so much in 343's games that there's no use in trying to memorize anything about these maps. If anything goes to show you how broken 343's game design is, look how often they change their own maps. Every single solitary map in Halo 4 and 5 has had some radical change made to it. Vortex is now a giant explosive clusterfuck. Adrift replaced the sword with an overshield and the shotguns with snipers. This is the smallest and most close quarter map in any Halo game that I can think of, and you think that snipers was the best thing for this? Every time I log on to Halo, I feel like I have to completely relearn everything. From putting in random new pieces of the map that break the flow, or getting around using weapons that were not there before, nothing in 343's Halo games looks or feels in any way consistent. How are you supposed to learn to use the map if 343 completely changes it a month or two later? I honestly believe that the reason for this is because 343 is wholly unaware of how Halo was meant to be played. As I said earlier, Halo was formerly a very tactical arena shooter where capturing power weapons and locking down parts of the map through coordination and teamwork is imperative to win the game. The problem is that 343 has such a broken understanding of the Halo formula that they don't even know how to implement classing abilities and functions in such a way that even works. Hate to break it to you guys, but shotguns on a small map makes a hell of a lot more sense than snipers. So how do we fix this while pushing the game forward? First off, let's break it down to the basics. Remove the movement abilities, tie everything new to the environment, not the character. Halo 1, 2, and 3 all had significant differences that made them all new, yet familiar. Halo 2 added hijacking vehicles, dual wielding, and took out health packs chiefly. Halo 3 kept all of that intact and added equipment like landmines, bubble shields, and regen fields, as well as a few more interactive environments, which was a slight expansion over what Halo 2 tried to do on a few maps. The next thing Bungie tried to do was implement armor abilities, which didn't go nearly as smoothly as they expected, led to even worse decisions, and ultimately ended up turning into some bastardized Crisis Titanfall monstrosity. What's the core fundamental difference between the abilities given to you in Halo 2 and 3 compared to Reach 4 and 5? The difference is that while in the original trilogy all of the new abilities were environmental, the later changes were all applied directly to your character. Equipment in Halo 3 was as much a power weapon as the tank or the sniper. You had to intentionally seek it out. Armor abilities and Spartan abilities, on the other hand, are merely applied to your character and not to the environment. The reason this doesn't work is much the same reason why jetpacks and wall running didn't work in Call of Duty, because the maps aren't shaped around those elements. The reason why Crisis and Titanfall work are because the games are molded around the abilities of your character. You're meant to use your abilities as a weapon, just like you'd use your guns and fists. 343's games, on the other hand, try to make the maps feel like traditional Halo maps without realizing that those kinds of maps don't work well with the abilities they're giving us. Midship doesn't work with Sprint because there's wide open areas that are supposed to be a no man's land. As long as you give someone with the ability to sprint, slide, jump, and thrust across to the next bit of cover, the tension and strategy of the map falls apart. I was actually kind of hopeful for more interactive environments after the Halo 2 remastered maps. Subtle map changes, like making ice fall onto the map, putting explosives around the area, and even making partially destructible environments can go a long way in making the game feel different yet familiar. Hell, they didn't even bother making the destructible cover in the multiplayer, yet made it a core element in the campaign. If there was a temporary speed boost, a stalagmite to shoot off the ceiling, or a small building to blow up, all of that would still allow you to keep the core gameplay intact without completely changing the style of the game. These weapons, vehicles, and power-ups are meant to bring the competitive edge to the battlefield. Instead, they may as well just be weapons that some dude dropped that are available whenever you want. And with the faster TTK and increased weapon damage, vehicles feel more like giant paperweights than a force to be reckoned with. As soon as you take out these movement movement abilities raise the TTK and apply any innovative features directly to the environment rather than the player, then you're heading in the right direction. Even if it's just something subtle, like opening and closing doors and windows, bringing down a boulder or small building, putting thruster packs down as equipment that can be used for short periods of time on the battlefield, it will immediately bring back that sense of classic Halo gameplay, given that the harmful movement abilities, fast TTK, and overpowered weaponry are also removed. In a quest to balance out their games, 343 has put in so much shit that it's impossible to truly make it all work together. How are you supposed to balance out a shield system, multiple movement abilities, vehicles, arena-style gameplay, and a huge arsenal of guns? Part of Halo's charm was its simplicity, but now you have like 80 versions of the assault rifle with a bunch of bullshit attachments to it. Here's an idea, 343. Instead of putting in as many gimmicks as possible, how about you try to break the game down to its basic core principles and focus solely on that? Sure, an alien cannon that shoots 3 bolts that disintegrate shit sounds really cool on paper, but in practice, it's hard to balance that out with the rest of the Halo sandbox, especially when the touch of a button can negate its effects on the enemy player entirely. But of course, taking out these abilities and tying them to the map isn't going to immediately fix the various issues with the game. Even raising the TTK and lowering the power of normal weapons against your average vehicle won't immediately alleviate the issues. One of the biggest issues with the current Halo games is the excess use of bullet magnetism. For those of you that are unaware, bullet magnetism is essentially one of the console peasant features necessary to making shooters work. You don't necessarily need to hit someone dead on in order to kill them. It's a necessary evil since thumbsticks are nowhere near as accurate as a mouse and keyboard. However, the amount of bullet magnetism has increased so drastically that you no longer even need to have your reticle over the enemy player in order to land a hit. Ever had one of those moments where you're behind a wall and you're still killed? That's because the bullet magnetism clips through solid objects. Precision weapons like the sniper rifle can be aimed a foot away from your head and still manage to get the kill. Even weapons with high spread can now be made to get kills from long ranges because the bullets will just magically arc right into your opponent. While I'm certainly not the kind of person to throw a fit about how skilled someone is in something as trivial as a video game, from the basic view of your everyday gamer, it's difficult, if not nigh on impossible, to have fun in a game where some bumbling retard can kill you without even directly hitting you. If bullets are clipping through solid objects due to increased bullet magnetism, or making people shoot me from the complete opposite side of the map with accuracy comparable if they were fighting me point blank, then there is a serious issue with the game. This isn't an issue of skill, it's an issue of fairness. The game gives every player a handicap, so even if you are really good at the game, the idiot on the other team can be just as good with the assistance of magical in-game bullshit. Lowering the bullet magnetism at the very least to the extent that it was in Halo 2 or 3 would go a long way in making the game feel more fair and balanced. Finally, we need to talk about this game's map design. I'll give 343 props for making an honest attempt at making Halo 5's campaign less linear than Halo 4, and for the most part, I think it succeeded, even though I think it still could do much better. But in terms of the multiplayer map design, they haven't improved at all. Sure, the maps, when broken down to their basic shapes, are more arena style, and that's all good and fine, but as I mentioned before, there's way too much shit on them. First off, cut this bullshit with making all the BTV maps Forge variants or giving us a bunch of shitty remakes of maps that are already in the game. Adding sand to one of the DLC maps doesn't make it new, nor does flipping midship upside down or adding some shitty Forge bridge onto the map. This shit is just lazy. There's no other word for it. Rather than devoting time and effort to making new and unique maps, 343 half-assed their way into making a bunch of shitty remasters of their own maps and shitting out some half-assed Forge maps in their shallow excuse for BTB. It's no wonder they made this DLC free. People would be irate if we had to pay for this shit. But what's even worse than their blatant laziness is their map designs in general. Let's leave out the cosmetics for a moment and focus solely on the core design. All of these maps are fundamentally fucked. Sightlines are all over the place. Objectives are placed seemingly at random with no real strategic value. Many of the maps have multiple levels to them that really don't need to be there. Cover is either sparse and practically useless or completely non-existent altogether. The problem 343 has is they come up with a general shape for the map but don't know how to apply their vision to fit the shape. Shockingly enough, you don't need to have the most complex looking maps in existence to get the job done. You can have a cool looking mining facility, but if there's no power weapons or general flow, then your cool looking map falls apart at the seams. The midship control points were undoubtedly its 2 main structures and the 2 substructures up by the bridge. If you controlled those, you controlled the map. Compare that to Plaza. What are you able to control here? Maybe you can try and hide in some alcove with a couple buddies and hope nobody lobs a grenade your way, but at the end of the day, you're a mouse running around in some maze with no real strategy. Even Pac-Man has more structure and flow than the majority of 343's maps. Look at the Haven remaster. Where do you go? The sides? the front and back, the walls, the halls, the lower floor. 343 seems to have a grasp of what the general shape of a map could look like, but not how to make the prominent positions that generate the flow. On midship, everyone runs around the ramps to try and get the sword, then they gravitate to the 4 main structures. On 343 maps, everyone runs for their favorite power weapon, then spends the entire rest of the game zipping about at random just to try and shoot one another. This, coupled with the damn near useless minimap that only sees people when they're practically right on top of you, just ends up turning the gameplay into a chaotic mess. Sure, a chaotic mess can be fun, as we see in Doom 2016, but that's not Halo. The reason Halo's multiplayer is so fun is because while it's simple, it takes some level of strategy to get used to. You can't play Call of Duty and expect to jump right into Halo without a hitch. In Halo, you need to memorize vehicle and weapon locations, analyze the flow of the map, intercept enemies in a smart and strategic way, and control power positions in order to prevent the enemy from gaining the upper hand. In Halo 4 and 5, power weapons are still around, but there's no way to control any of the unbridled chaos, and you just have to stick with running around and hoping you don't get shot from behind or run into a group of people waiting just behind the next corner. 343 needs to understand that, along with the player abilities and ridiculous weapons, simplicity isn't a bad thing. There is such a thing as being too complicated or too cluttered. If you add too many elements to something, then they don't always work out very well. Case in point, wall running in jetpacks in Call of Duty. Shoehorn too much shit in anything in general, and it's just not going to work out well. 343 needs to focus on the little things. Just because games like Titanfall, Crysis, Warframe, and Destiny have a lot of sales doesn't mean that we need to take elements from those games and apply it to Halo. Every game has its niche, and taking things from other games and slapping it onto Halo just because it's trendy doesn't mean it's going to work. If people want to play those other games, then they'll just go play those. If people want to play Halo, it's because we actually want to play Halo, not some Titanfall crossbreed. Now we get to the art design. Halo has always been a beautiful game, and if I can give 343 credit for anything, it's that their games are usually visually stunning, at least in some areas. Although Halo 5 had a serious issue with anti-aliasing that made ominous shots like this look a hell of a lot less pretty. But there's a fundamental problem with the art design that 343 is missing. It feels like 343 wants their art design to be as robotic and futuristic looking as possible, even to the point that it totally wrecks the look of the game. While I think they've definitely nailed environments, when it comes to weapons, vehicles, armor, and enemies, they've totally dropped the ball. I can understand creative differences, but there is such a thing as going too far. If we turn Pac-Man into a cube that blows instead of sucks...
Sanders, what's going on? It's Megamaid. She's gone from suck to blow.
Then that wouldn't really feel like Pac-Man, now would it? No, but it would be real fucking hot. When it comes to 343, it really feels like there's too much. Sure, it's cool to see all the hexagon patterns on Chief's visor, or the stitching on Locke's gloves, or the T-Rex arms in the Promethean Knights, but do any of those things add anything meaningful to the game? No. No, they do not. In an attempt to add as much detail as possible, it really feels like 343 has overcomplicated their designs to the point where none of it makes any sense anymore. What the fuck is the point of the unicorn horn? Why do the warthogs have extra gasoline tanks just taped to the back? Why did the wraiths look like someone crushed them in a trash compactor? What's the logic behind the dumbass design of the Carbine's screen? Why the fuck does Chief's chest plate need to have his numbers written in Braille? There's so many indentations and angles and totally unnecessary pieces that don't even make sense anymore. There was a charm about the simplicity of Chief's design. It was like an armored motorcyclist. The Marines had cartoony helmets and armor pieces that looked like knee and shoulder pads that a skater would use. The Elite's armor looked like the kind of shit you'd see on a knight, which fit in the context of their culture. Now the Covenant armor looks borderline useless. The Elite's faces look way too flat, which is inexcusable given that Halo Wars 1 pretty much nailed the Elites in the cutscenes. Aside from the fact that they gave them really tight asses. In regards to the alien species in particular, nothing looks right. The ships have upside down looking cities, their colors are all wrong now, their ships just look like blobs of floating diarrhea, their guns have been turned into shit that barely even makes sense anymore, and the Prometheans literally look like Bionicles that drive those stupid fucking ships from the fourth god-awful Transformers movie. 343 has an issue with taking themselves way too seriously. They seem to think that they need to make everything grittier and darker, when in reality, Halo has never been an especially grim game. Sure, Halo Reach wasn't exactly sunshines and rainbows, but part of Halo's charm was its comedy. It had entire characters that were dedicated just to make you laugh. There were even skulls that could make the game funnier. Now, if you apply that same skull, it doesn't really change a fucking thing. The tone, and with it the look of the game, is now so dark and gritty that there's no room for the lightheartedness and even genuine absurdity of the previous Halo games. Halo 3 was undoubtedly a serious game and had some serious moments, but it was mixed in with comedy relief relief and an art style that wasn't totally realistic, yet fit really well. Just because you put a lot of time and effort into making all these crazy details for your armor doesn't mean it's automatically good. Some of the best armor in Halo Reach was the most obnoxious looking shit imaginable. Where's the practicality in shoulder pieces that are bigger than your head? There is none, but it's fun and looks cool. 343 needs to stop taking themselves and their games so seriously. Part of Halo's charm was its ridiculousness. We're playing as an intergalactic biker that kills space zombies on a giant floating testicle, for fuck's sake. 343's Halo reminds me a lot of the recent DC superhero movies, excluding the one that was good. In an attempt to be dark and gritty unlike its competition, it instead comes off as some awful, unintentional attempt at a parody that progressively destroys the product's overall quality. But finally, and in my opinion, what is most important is the quality of 343's storytelling in Halo. I liked Halo 4, mostly. I think it's a generally good story, but flounders about in some areas. Halo 5's story is indisputably the worst in the entire franchise, and Halo Wars 2 is about as limp and barren as the first Gears of War. Halo, for me, has always been about the story. I've never really been big on multiplayer in most games unless I'm playing it casually with friends or once in a while jumping on just because I had nothing better to do. But when I play a video game, I want to be engrossed in a deep and enriching plot, and for a long time, Halo provided exactly that. Not only was it a genuinely fun game to play, but the narrative was easily one of the best in the science fiction genre. It had the depth of a fantasy story with the fun action and awesome side characters of Star Wars. It had all of this cool lore, and there were high stakes throughout the series, but it told the tight-knit tale of a small cast of characters that you learned to love and care about. But honestly, it feels like 343 is thinking way too big. They've already conjured up a scenario that's more drastic than the prospect of the Halos firing. Now, Cortana is the space viewer, and she's in command of all the Forerunner tech ever, and she is the command and control of the entire fucking universe, and now all the good guys are on the run and have to fight a bunch of giant evil EMP space owls. Granted, I think it's a huge step in the right direction to get rid of Brian Reed because he's simply not good at telling stories. A good writer can make the dumbest idea good, but a bad writer can make the best idea shit. Brian was neither a good writer nor did he have a good idea, so we didn't just get shit, but we got elemental shit. But I don't think that 343's route of dumb down the stories because everyone else is a pleb is a good idea either. Now, I think it's a pretty good idea to put up a codex in the game like they did in Halo Wars 2, and I genuinely hope that it returns in Halo 6 and all other games in the future. But I don't even necessarily think that their approach to make the games and comics near obsolete is a great idea either. What made the earlier Halo books work so well is they complemented the game. The games themselves had a lot going on and you could understand the story perfectly fine, but the books went more in depth and gave you the backstories behind all the characters and the lore. 343 stories, however, are extremely important, narrative-changing things. Nowhere in Halo 5 that explained why, how, or even when Buck became a Spartan. Even in Halo Wars 2, you get no time to see Serena's final moments because that's all reserved for literally one of the worst comics I have ever had the displeasure of reading. I can at the very least appreciate the fact that 343 is trying to make stories that don't require intimate knowledge of every Halo book, comic, and movie ever made in order to understand it, but I think they're missing the point. Aside from the side Halo games, the main games always had deep lore and interesting backstories to the characters and locations. These were never simple stories, but they were disguised like them. At its core, Halo 1 is basically just you fall in a ring and kill aliens, then zombies come out and you kill them and then you blow up the ring, the end. But that's not really all of it, now is it? You have the mystery of what Halo is, who 343 Guilty Spark is, who the Forerunners are, what caused the Flood, why the Covenant worships the ring, what Reach was supposed to be, how humanity is losing the war and is only just desperately trying to not let the enemy find Earth, and then you have the lore and backstory of the Spartans and, chiefly, John 117. Halo did much the same thing that the Lord of the Rings did. It told a story that was simple in its structure but had a fuck ton of lore that enriched the world. That's why there's 15 plus Middle-earth books explaining all the lore and there's still more coming out. 343, however, is like if Tolkien decided to write the Lord of the Rings while also shoehorning in the Silmarillion, but making the events of that prequel story directly impact everything in the Lord of the Rings. They feel the need to directly incorporate all of this shit and make it a huge plot point, but the problem is they don't bother to explain any of it. You want to use the domain as the center of the plot? Cool, go for it, but if you're going to do it, you have to clarify what the domain actually is. I still have no fucking clue what it is, or what it's supposed to do, or how Cortana got into it after not only being zapped by a laser, but nuked, and furthermore, how it managed to save her. For that matter, have they ever actually given any kind of answer as to what the Warden Eternal even is? At least the Halo 4 terminals did an adequate job of explaining the role of the Didact, but all I know about the Warden is that he's a robot, but he's also not a robot, plot, and he guards the domain, and I still don't even know what that's supposed to be. Wow, what a compelling villain that I totally care about. Look at the original Halo games. You had a compelling plot that had a lot of intricacies in place, but you also had a ton of backstory that you could look into. The Halo 3 terminals, for instance, added so much more depth in the world, and they weren't required in order to enjoy the story. Inversely, if you don't read the books or didn't watch the Halo 4 terminals, there's no way you would ever give a shit about the Didact. Sure, the main structure of the classic Halo stories were simple, but it was the subtle backstories that made it interesting. You didn't need to know the history of Middle-earth to find the Balrog scene to be the coolest fucking thing in cinema history. Just like you didn't need to read the 3 shitty Forerunner books to understand the tragedy of their species before blowing themselves up to wipe out the Flood. In 343's games, you need to know the history of certain characters, locations, and events, or you're gonna be totally lost. This isn't just an issue with forcing people to read external material, it's just generally shit character development in writing. 343 has ambitious ideas for lore and backstories, but doesn't know how to implement any of it. They don't have any sense of subtlety. Everything is very blunt and in your face, whereas the original Halo games are a bit more vague and open to the interpretation of the player. I can't pretend to know anything about 343's plans for Halo 6, nor do I think they'll even necessarily have the time or ability to change any significant things by the time this video comes out, but if there's even the chance that 343 might see this or someone with a larger audience might make the same argument, then they need to know that the reason why Halo's story worked wasn't because it had the deep and interesting lore, but because of how it was implemented. In this video, I've repeatedly compared Halo to The Lord of the Rings, not because I think they're in any way similar or comparable in terms of quality, but because they both have crazy amounts of depth. But whereas The Lord of the Rings fits its lore in the correct way, 343's Halo games have not. In The Lord of the Rings, all you needed to know about the lore was Sauron made a ring of power and used it to try and control Middle-earth. He was defeated, but the ring was never destroyed, and only by throwing it into Mount Doom could its evil be undone. And that was it. That was all the lore you needed to know. I don't think I need to explain the fact that Tolkien's world is swimming in books full of lore, but it was so masterfully written that you didn't need to know anything about the rest of the story in order to enjoy it. You also didn't really need to know what the Forerunners, the Precursors, the Flood, the inner workings of the Covenant, or the human insurrection was in order to appreciate the story of the original Halo games. Now you need to know that Oni is evil and basically just Weyland-Yutani at this point. You need to know that humans don't like Spartans or the UNSC, or that all the alien species have different subcultures and shit, or that there's new religious beliefs that motivate the new Covenant, or that Forerunners had like 50 fucking backup plans to not die when Halo fired. Some of these things are explained in-game through Easter eggs like terminals, but the problem is that they're not a part of the main game, and they were never written in to be an integral part of the plot. Does the backstory of Morgoth take anything away from the Balrog unearthed in Moria? No, you don't need to know shit about Morgoth, and you get a shitload of entertainment out of this scene. But if you don't know the entire backstory of the Didact, then all you get out of this scene is that he's a Forerunner and he's evil because he's evil. Yeah. So to summarize, 343 doesn't need to tell simpler stories. They don't need to dumb it down for us, and they don't need to make Halo books and comics that only amount to side stories that have no real bearing on the world or its characters. What they need to do is implement these story ideas intelligently. Don't make it a requirement to understand all of these plot points, but don't make them borderline useless. Allude to a larger world, but make sure that the main plot takes precedence and is as strong as possible. The lore and backstories and external material should enrich the story, not act as a crutch for it. Halo is a game that for some unknown reason I still give a shit about. I don't know why, because there's really no reason for it at this point, but I grew up with these games, owned all of the books and comics, watched all the movies and miniseries, and played the series damn near religiously up until 2012. I've spoken in the past of how many sci-fi stories just aren't very good. Many books, games, and movies that try to show off a science fiction world end up flopping or leaving much to be desired. Halo, however, is one of the few sci-fi worlds that's left me endlessly endeared by its sense of wonder and intrigue. I love the characters, the lore, its mysteries and horrors, its enemies and allies, how things worked, what conspiracies were involved, where the lines between good and evil became blurred. Not to mention, it was just a genuinely fun game, with easily some of the best FPS mechanics in any given console shooter. It had amazing multiplayer, phenomenal Forge environments, great cosmetic customization, and endless possibilities for creating new and original content from a huge and very dedicated community of like-minded fans. Now, Halo is just a shell of its former self. It's a horse that collapsed on the the side of the road while its owner whips the shit out of it and helplessly tries to convince everyone that the horse is still the second coming of Hidalgo. It's a series that went from the very top to rock bottom. I don't think it's totally 343's fault, since Bungie did make some serious fuck-ups after 343, what with ODST being a glorified, overpriced map pack, and Reach totally ass-fucking the original story into oblivion, coupled with some of the most lazily designed and horribly unbalanced multiplayer systems I have ever seen in any game. But it's impossible to deny that under 343, the series has only gotten staler. I went from playing Halo almost every day to playing it maybe once or twice every couple months or so. What was once a game that made me excited every time a new entry was announced has now been reduced to just another Halo game. Halo 4 had a lot of promise but didn't deliver on most of its elements. Halo 5 had a lot of promise as well, but was somehow an even more polarizing experience. A massive portion of longtime fans have left the series entirely, and even though I've been playing the game since I was a little kid, I'm frankly inclined to leave with them. Though I'm happy that there's a chance that the next Halo game won't come out until 2019, giving 343 ample time to make a quality game, I'm still racked with nervousness. They've already demonstrated their lack of knowledge on the game and its community, and if I see another reveal where Spartans fly through the air and pull off stunts you'd see in an episode of Power Rangers, then I'll be more inclined to abandon the series completely and pretend that Halo 3 was the last Halo game. I've read that J.R.R. Tolkien was about to write a sequel to The Lord of the Rings where Sauron came back and the story was told from the perspective of Aragorn's son. He rightfully abandoned this idea since it would just be beating a dead horse and taking away from the beauty and epicness of The Lord of the Rings. 343's Halo games honestly feel like if Tolkien actually wrote that Lord of the Rings sequel. It abuses the lore, commits a great injustice to the established characters, and eventually becomes so drawn out that you get to the point where you just hate everything about that universe. I don't want to hate Halo. I love the world and its characters. I love the lore and music and visuals and gameplay. Some of my favorite gaming memories come from playing Halo with my friends, both split screen and online. But this Halo is not the borderline masterpiece I grew up with. This Halo is like the Teen Titans Go or the Force Awakens or the cursed child of the Halo franchise. Will I still buy Halo 6? Probably, if only to see this iconic hero go through to the bitter end. But if Halo 6 doesn't learn from the mistakes of the last couple Halo games, then I'm not going to waste my time with this franchise anymore. I've given 343 as many chances as I can, given them the benefit of the doubt in as many situations as is feasible, tried and tried and tried to make myself care about the new story and new multiplayer, but I just can't do it anymore. At some point, all good things have to end, and all 343 has done to this franchise is abuse it and flaunt it around proudly as if just having the right to make a Halo game gives them some kind of street cred that they never earned to begin with. It's not like 343 was a team handpicked to make Halo because of some great accomplishment they made in the past. They were assembled literally because Microsoft has nothing else going for them. You think Gears of War is going to sell a console? Get fucking real. The only reason I ever bought an Xbox One was just because of Halo. Honestly, I have very little hope for the franchise at this point. I still want to give them a chance, and I still probably will, if only just because of the fact that I've loved these games for such a long time and want the game to return to the top of the food chain, but I've laid my cards out on the table for what I believe 343 has done fundamentally wrong at every turn and why I think they need to change. If they don't learn their lesson and learn it damn fucking fast, then this will be the final nail in the coffin and I'll have to accept that Halo is finally dead.